Some letters arrive, and you can feel the weight of them before you open the envelope. This one came from a small town up the Maine coast, the address written in a careful, slanting hand, the kind they don't teach anymore. She asked me not to share her name, only her story. So I'll tell it the way she told it to me, in the third person, the way she said she finally learned to see her own life, from a little distance, clearly, for the first time. She wrote one line at the top of the page, underlined twice. The people who said they wanted to protect me were the ones I needed protection from. Here is how it began.
The morning, Marlo Ashby learned her son was getting married. She was sitting at the piano with the lid up and a cloth in her hand, working beeswax into the keys the way Toby had taught her 30 years before. The phone rang against the music stand and skittered an inch across the wood. She wiped her fingers before she answered, because some habits outlast the reasons for them. "Mom," Errol's voice had that bright, rehearsed quality he got when he wanted something to land well. "I've got news. Good news." She set the cloth down. Through the window over the piano, she could see the whole of it. The gray shingled house, the slope of brown grass going down to the water, and beyond the grass, the long, low building with the sliding doors. Ashby Boatworks still lettered across the front in Toby's own paint, fading now to the color of weak tea. 2 years he'd been gone. The boatyard hadn't built a hull since. But she kept the doors oiled so they slid clean, and once a week she swept the floor, and she could not have told anyone why. "Tell me," she said. "I'm getting married. Her name's Vesper." Vesper lured. "Mom, you're going to love her." Marlo was 67 years old, and she had taught piano to half the children in Renport, and she knew the difference between a true note and a forced one. "You're going to love her" was a thing you said when you were not sure it was true, and were trying to make it so by saying it loudly. She decided, in the way mothers decide 1,000 small generosities a day, to believe him anyway. "Then I already do," she said. "When do I get to meet her?" There was the smallest pause. "Sunday? We thought we'd drive up. Vesper's never seen the coast this far north." The coast this far north. As if Renport were a destination on a brochure, and not the place where Errol had learned to walk on the workshop floor, holding the rail of a half-built dory, while his father planed the ribs smooth. "Sunday's perfect," Marlo said. "I'll get the house ready." She hung up and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the keys, not playing, just feeling the cool of the ivory under her palms. Then she did the thing she always did when her heart was too full to sit still with it. She played. Not anything grand, just the little waltz Toby used to hum off-key while he worked, the one she'd turned into a real piece for him, one winter as a joke, and he'd loved so much it stopped being a joke. The notes went out the window and down the brown grass toward the water, and if you'd been standing in the yard, you'd have heard a woman playing a love song to a man who'd been dead 2 years, and you'd have thought, what a sad thing. And you'd have been wrong. It wasn't sad. It was the opposite of sad. It was the only conversation she had left with him, and she did not intend to give it up. That evening, she walked down to the boatyard with the key on the leather fob he'd made for it. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old varnish, and the particular cold a building gets when no one is breathing in it. Toby's tools still hung on the pegboard, in the shape of the silhouettes he'd painted around each one. So, a thing always went back where it belonged. On the workbench sat the brass ship's bell, salvaged off a schooner that broke up on the ledges before either of them was born, polished by Toby's hand, until it threw back the light like a small sun. He used to ring it at the end of a good day. One clear note, and you knew the work was done and done right. She didn't ring it. She just rested her fingers on the cool curve of it, the way she'd rested them on the piano keys. And she said, out loud, to no one, "Our boy's getting married, Toby." Doesn't bring back. The bell didn't answer. But the saying of it helped. What Marlo did not think about that evening, what she had trained herself not to think about, because thinking about it meant thinking about money, and thinking about money felt like a betrayal of the place was that the Boatyard and the 40 acres of waterfront it sat on were worth, by the last appraisal her husband had quietly commissioned the year before he died, somewhere north of $4 million. Toby had folded that appraisal into an envelope and put it in the floor safe under the loose board in the bedroom closet, along with the deed and the marriage license, and a letter she had read once and could not bear to read again. She knew the numbers were in there. She simply lived as though they weren't. The piano needed tuning, and the truck needed tires, and the property tax came due in October, and that was the texture of her days. The $4 million was a thing that existed on paper in a dark box under a board, and it had nothing to do with the smell of cedar or the brown grass or the bell, so she thought. Sunday came clear and cold. She did not cook all night. Her knees wouldn't have it anymore, and besides, Toby had always been the cook. Instead, she did the thing that was hers to give. She tuned the piano. She spent the whole gray afternoon with the tuning lever and the felt mutes and her good ear, pulling each string up true because she had decided she would play for them the waltz and then maybe the Schubert if the girl seemed the type to sit still for it. And she wanted every note to be honest when she did. They arrived at 4. Errol got out of a car too new and too low to the ground for the dirt drive, and came around to open the passenger door, and out stepped Vesper Lord. She was beautiful in the way of a thing in a catalog, finished, exact, every edge attended to, a camel coat that had never seen a wood stove, boots with no salt stain on them. She stood in the dirt drive and let her eyes travel up the front of the house, and Marlowe, watching from the door, saw the look and knew it for exactly what it was, because she had seen it before on the faces of summer. People who came to ask whether the Boatyard was for sale. It was the look of someone pricing a thing. The shingles, the roofline, the water frontage. Vesper Lourdes looked at the home where Toby died, and she did not see a home. She saw a listing, Mrs. Ashby. Vesper came up the steps with her hand already out, businesslike, a handshake, and not the hug Marlowe had half opened her arms for, so that Marlowe had to fold the arms back down and turn the gesture into smoothing her cardigan. The hand was cool, and the grip was brief. Errol's told me so much. Marlowe, please. Come in out of the cold, both of you. I've got the kettle on. Inside, Vesper's gaze went around the front room the way a level goes around a wall, checking everything against true. It snagged in the piano. Oh, she said. You play? 40 years I taught it, Marlowe said. Half this town can find middle C because of me. She'd meant it warmly, a little proudly. She heard how it sounded a half-second too late. Small, provincial, a woman whose whole life fit in one room with one instrument. That's so sweet, Vesper said, and the word sweet came down on the table like a coin laid on a counter, payment for a thing already valued and found cheap. Errol stood between them, with his hands in his pockets, smiling too hard, looking from one woman to the other the way he used to look at the sky when he was small, and a storm was coming in off the water. Like he could feel the pressure dropping, and didn't yet have a word for it. I tuned the piano, Marlowe said, before she could stop herself. I thought after supper I might play you something. Errol's father wrote a little tune. Well, hummed it, really, and We can't stay for supper, Vesper said. She said it gently. That was the thing Marlowe would remember, lying awake that night. How gently the girl had said it, how kindly. The way you'd tell a child the fair had closed. We've got to get back tonight. Errol has an early thing at the dealership, but this was lovely. Truly. And so the piano stayed tuned and unplayed, every string pulled honest, waiting in the cooling room. They left before the light went. Marlowe stood in the doorway and watched the low new car pick its way back up the dirt drive, and she lifted her hand to wave, and Errol lifted his hand back, but Vesper was already looking at her phone. Down the slope, in the dark, the Boatyard sat with its doors oiled clean, and its bell unrung, and its $4 million folded in a box. And none of them. Not the mother in the doorway, not the son driving away. Certainly not the girl pricing the shingles in her head, had yet understood what any of it would come to mean. Marlo went back inside. She didn't turn on the lamps. She sat down at the piano in the last of the gray window light, and she played the waltz, after all, for no one, all the way through, every note true. The visits that followed taught Marlo a new arithmetic. She learned to count the minutes between hello and goodbye, and she learned that the number was getting smaller. The second time they came north, it was a Saturday in late autumn, the maples already bare, the bay the color of a knife. Vesper brought a hostess gift, which surprised Marlo and touched her until she unwrapped it, a scented candle in a heavy glass jar, the kind sold in shops that smell of money, labeled driftwood and sea salt. Marlo set it on the windowsill and did not light it. She lived 100 yards from real driftwood and real sea salt. The candle struck her as a strange thing to give a woman who had the actual ocean at the bottom of her yard, like bringing a recording of birdsong to someone who slept every night with the window open. But she said thank you, and she meant the thank you, even if she couldn't quite mean the candle. This time, Vesper asked to see the property. Errol's told me about the boatyard, she said. Over the coffee Marlo had made too strong out of nerves. I'd love to see it. He says it's been in the family forever. 3 generations, Marlo said, warming. Toby's grandfather built the first hull in there in 1923. They did dories at first, then the lobster boats, when the engines came in, then… Vesper had already risen, coat half on. Can we walk down, the 3 of them, the brown grass crunching with the first frost? Marlo slid the big door back, clean, on its oiled track the way she kept it, and the cedar smell rolled out to meet them, and for one foolish, hopeful moment she thought, she'll feel it. Anyone would feel it. Vesper stepped inside, and her boots clicked on the swept floor, and her eyes went up to the rafters, and along the walls, and out the wide windows to the water, and Marlo watched her do the thing again, the level going around the room, checking everything against true. Except this time Marlo understood she was checking it against a different true. Square footage, frontage, view. How much land comes with it? Vesper asked, lightly, the way you'd ask someone's age. Oh, I never think about it in acres, Marlo said. It's just the yard and down to the water and the bit of meadow on the north side where Errol used to. Roughly, though. Errol was running his hand along the workbench, along the silhouettes his father had painted around each tool, and he wasn't looking at either of them. It's like 40 acres, babe, he said to the bench. Give or take. 40 waterfront acres. Vesper said it slowly, the way you'd repeat a number a doctor had just given you. She turned in a full, slow circle, and her gaze passed over the bell, the brass ship's bell, throwing back the gray window light, and did not stop on it, because the bell was not worth anything. And then her gaze came back to Marlo, and her whole face changed, warmed, open like a door. It's beautiful, Marlo. It really is. It just breaks my heart a little, that's all. Breaks your heart that it's just sitting here, all this, and nobody using it. Toby would have wanted it to be alive, wouldn't he? Not a museum. She said Toby like she'd known him. She had never met him. Anyway, she pulled her coat tight. It's freezing. Errol, we should go. That night, Marlo lit the candle, after all, just to have done it, just to not have a gift sitting unused on the sill, and the room filled with a smell that was nothing like the water at the bottom of her yard. And she sat in the window seat with her tea going cold and thought about the phrase not a museum, turning it over the way you'd turn over a stone to see what lived under it. What lived under it, she would understand later, was a plan. But that night, all she had was a feeling. And you cannot take a feeling to anyone, least of all your own son. The freeze came on the way the bay froze. Not all at once, but a skin of ice each cold night, a little farther out each morning, until one day you looked and the hole near water had gone hard and white, and you couldn't remember the last day it had moved. The calls grew shorter. Errol had always been a caller. Sunday nights, 20 minutes. The dealership gossip and the weather and love you, Mom. Now it was Vesper who called, and Vesper called with purpose. There was never a call just to talk. Every call had a shape, and the shape was always the same. A soft opening, a sharp middle, a sweet close. How are you holding up out there all alone, Marlo? It's a lot of house for one person. Does the roof give you trouble? Errol worries about that roof. And Marlo, who had not mentioned the roof, who had a perfectly sound roof, would find herself defending the roof, explaining the roof, and only hours later understand that she had been made, somehow, to feel the roof was a problem she ought to be ashamed of. She mentioned the calls to Della once, on the phone. Odette Renwick, Della to everyone since the 3rd grade, had retired the year before from the county probate court, where she'd spent 30 years filing the paperwork of other people's deaths and inheritances and family wars. They'd been friends since they were girls with scabbed knees. She asks an awful lot about the house, Marlo said. And the boatyard, the taxes on it. Whether it's a burden. She laughed, to make it smaller than it felt. I think she's just being thoughtful. There was a silence on Della's end that went on a beat too long. Marlo, Della said, when somebody starts measuring your burdens out loud, how heavy they are, how you must be so tired, how much easier things would be. They're not usually doing it for your sake. I sat 30 years across a counter from families. I know the sound of it. It's the sound they make right before. Right before what? Before they ask you to sign something. Della let that sit. Then, lighter, because she could hear she'd frightened her friend. Or maybe she's a saint, and I'm an old cynic. Probably that. Forget I said anything. But Marlo did not forget it. She put it in the same place. She put the look on Vesper's face in the boatyard. And the phrase, not a museum. And she did not yet know she was building a case. But she was starting to keep the file. The wedding was set for June. In a renovated barn an hour south. The kind with a chandelier hung in it now and a price per head. Marlo found this out the way she found out most things that winter. Secondhand late, after the decision was made. She had imagined, in some private and unspoken room of her heart, that she might play at the wedding. Not play at the wedding. Not the ceremony. She wasn't fool enough to think they'd the groom's mother at the keyboard. But the dinner, maybe, a little while during the dinner. The way she'd played at every Ashby wedding and christening for 40 years. There was a tradition. Toby's own mother had started it. The family musician played one piece, just one, and it meant you are ours now. This is what we do. She raised it carefully on a Sunday call, to Errol directly, having waited until she heard Vesper was out. I thought, she said, if it wouldn't be in the way, your grandmother's tradition, you remember, I could play one piece at the dinner, the waltz. Your father's waltz. The pause told her before the words did. Mom, we've got a string quartet booked. Vesper found them. They're like professional. It's all kind of locked in. Of course, Marlo said. Of course it is. Silly of me. It's not silly. But he said it the way you say it's not your fault to someone whose fault it plainly is, in your telling of it. It's just, Vesper has a real specific vision for the day. You know how she is. Marlo did not, in fact, know how she was, because Vesper had never once let her close enough to know. But she said, I do. It's her day. You're right. And she got off the phone and she went and sat at the piano in the dark. And she did not play the waltz, because for the first time since Toby died, she could not make herself touch the keys. They looked, in the gray light, like teeth. She understood, sitting there, that the quartet was not about music. You did not refuse a mother one piece at her only son's wedding because of a vision. You refused her, because keeping her at the keyboard, even for 4 minutes, would have made her a member of the family in front of 200 people. And Vesper had no intention of letting that happen. The whole architecture of the day, Marlo began to see, was being built to do one thing, to place Marlo Ashby somewhere near the back, in a chair, harmless and grateful and small. She was right. She had no idea yet how right. Down the slope, the boatyard sat dark under a hard winter moon, the bay frozen white all the way out to the ledges, the bell silent in the cold, and the deed and the appraisal slept in their box under the loose board, worth $4 million and not one note of music, waiting for the spring. June came the way it always came to that coast, late. And then all at once, the brown grass going green in a week, the bay loosening, the lupines coming up purple along the road to the boatyard. Marlo drove the hour south in her good gray dress, the one she'd bought for Toby's funeral, and worn only that once, because it was the finest thing she owned, and she'd be damned if she'd buy something new to be made small in. The barn had indeed a chandelier in it. It hung from the old hand-hewn beams like a piece of jewelry on a working woman's wrist. And Marlo, who had spent her life around honest wood, looked up at it and thought of Toby's rafters down at the yard, and how he'd never have hung a thing like that in a building meant for work. But it wasn't her day. She'd said so herself, on the phone, in the dark. It was Vesper's day. She kept reminding herself of this as the way you press a bruise to see if it still hurts. She had come early. She always came early. It was a courtesy bred into her so deep she couldn't have shed it if she'd tried. So she was among the first inside, and she stood for a while not knowing where to put herself, holding the small wrapped gift she'd brought, until a young woman with a clipboard and an earpiece found her. "You're the groom's mother, Marlo Ashby." The young woman ran a finger down her list. "Ashby. Okay. You're." A small frown. "You're in row 4, on the left. There's a card. Row 4. Marlo walked down to the rows of white chairs set up in the meadow behind the barn and found the little place card with her name on it in gold script, and she sat. And as the meadow filled, she came to understand row 4. In front of her sat people she had never seen. Vesper's colleagues from the brokerage she'd gather later, women in pale dresses who all seemed to know each other, and Vesper's college friends. And an entire row of what turned out to be the wedding planner's preferred photographers' families, given good seats as a professional courtesy. In front of the groom's mother. When Errol came out to stand at the front in his rented suit, pale and handsome and terrified, Marlo had to lift her chin and look between two strangers' shoulders to see her own son get married. She did not cry. She had decided in the car that she would not cry, and she didn't, though there was a moment when the officiant spoke of family, of the two families joining, and Marlo's eyes went hot, and she pressed her thumbnail hard into the pad of her finger until the wanting to cry passed off, the way a wave passes as under a moored boat without taking it anywhere. At the dinner, it was the string quartet, as promised. They were very good. They played beautifully and correctly and with no love in it at all, because they had never met the people they were playing for, and Marlo sat at table 11, near the kitchen doors, the heat coming off them, each time a waiter pushed through, and listened to 4 strangers play correct music at her son's wedding, while the piece she would have played sat unplayed inside her like a held breath. The people at table 11 were Vesper's father's second wife's relations, pleasant and entirely uninterested in the silver-haired woman who'd been seated among them, and they talked across her about a cruise. When the toasts came, Vesper ran them like a woman running a meeting. Her father, her sister who wept, her maid of honor, a college roommate, a colleague who made a joke about commission that the brokerage tables found very funny. And then Vesper looked as though she might move on to the cake, and a voice, Marlo never learned whose, some kind soul, some stranger, called out, "What about the groom's mother? Doesn't his mom get to say something?" A small silence. Vesper's smile did not falter, it simply changed temperature. "Of course," she said, into the microphone to the room. "Marlo, would you like to say a few words?" "Keep it short, sweetheart. The cake's melting." A ripple of laughter, warm and entirely against Marlo, who now had to stand, at table 11, by the kitchen doors, with no microphone, while 200 people turned in their seats. She stood. She had prepared something. She'd written it on an index card 3 weeks before, and revised it a dozen times and knew it by heart, about the boy who'd learned to walk, holding the rail of a half-built dory, about his father's hands, about how love was a thing you built slow, plank by plank, and caulk tight, and how she wished them a long, seaworthy life. She got as far as, "I want to thank you all for being here." and to tell you about a little boy who learned to walk in a boatyard. And the quartet, misreading some signal, or reading exactly the signal Vesper meant them to read, lifted their bows and began the cake-cutting music, and the room's attention turned as one body toward Vesper, and Errol rising with the knife, and Marlowe's voice, unamplified, 67 years old, telling 200 distracted strangers about a boy learning to walk, was simply covered over, like a small sound the tide takes. She stood another moment with her mouth half open and the index card in her hand. Then she sat down. The relations at table 11 had already turned to watch the cake. She left before the dancing. She told Errol she was tired, which was true, and he hugged her. A quick hug, his eyes already going back over her shoulder to the room and the music and his bright, loud new life, and said, "Thanks for coming, Mom. Love you," in the voice you use for a thing you're saying while looking at something else. And Vesper appeared at his side the way cold air appears when a door opens, and put a hand on his arm and said, "Thank you so much for making the drive, Marlowe. Get home safe. It's such a long way. Such a long way." As though the distance were a fact of geography and not a thing she was glad of. In the gravel lot, fitting her key to the door of the old truck, Marlowe heard them. Vesper and two of the pale dress women on the barn's lit porch, not troubling to lower their voices, because why would you lower your voice about a woman who'd already gone? So glad she's an hour up the coast, honestly. She seems sweet. Oh, she is. She's perfectly sweet, it's just, you know how they get. Mothers, they want to vote on everything. And Errol's so. And then a laugh, the three of them, the laugh going up into the June dark, and Marlowe got into the truck and shut the door on it. She drove the hour home with the windows down, and the cold sea air pouring in, and she did not cry until she was past the turnoff, to the brokerage town, and out onto the dark coast road with no one to see. And then she cried the way the bay broke up in spring. Not gently, all at once. A hard heaving thing that she had to pull over for, gripping the wheel, her forehead down against her knuckles. For 30 years, she had been the center of that boy's world. He had run to her off the school bus. He had called for her in fevers. And in one June evening, under a borrowed chandelier, she had been made into a thing to be glad lived an hour up the coast. When the crying was done, and it did finish, she'd buried a husband. She knew crying finished. She sat in the dark, pulled over truck and listened to the peepers in the ditch and felt something settle in her that was not grief. It was colder than grief and steadier. She didn't have a word for it yet. The word she'd think later was clarity. The silence after the wedding was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. She waited for the call. The honeymoon was a week in someplace warm. She knew that much. She waited the week, and then she waited past the week, telling herself they were jet-lagged, unpacking, settling. When she finally broke and called herself, it was Vesper's voice that answered Errol's phone. "Marlowe, how are you? I just wanted to hear about the trip, and to see how you two are settling. Oh, it was amazing. I'll send pictures." Listen, Errol's right tip's in the middle of something. The dealership's a nightmare right now. Can he call you back? Love you. He did not call back. Not that day, not that week. And the dealership's a nightmare turned out to be the truest thing anyone said to Marlowe that whole season. Though she didn't know it yet, didn't know that Errol Ashby's car lot was 9 months behind, leveraged to the rafters, drowning, and that her son was a man going down by the head in dark water, looking around for anything that would float. She only knew the silence. So she did the thing mothers do. She made an excuse to go to them. She found, in the back of a drawer, the sheaf of sheet music Toby had collected over the years. Show tunes and hymns, and a few of his own scratched-out attempts at the waltz in his own pencil hand. And she thought, Errol should have his father's music. It was the kind of gift that costs nothing and means everything, which is to say, it was exactly the wrong gift to bring to that house. But she didn't know that either. She drove the hour south to the new place, a glass and gray house in a development where every lawn was the same green, and she rang the bell, with Toby's music under her arm. Vesper opened the door in a silk robe at 2 in the afternoon, and her face, when she saw who it was, did the thing a face does when a thing is unwelcome. The half-second of true reaction before the manners catch up. "Marlowe, we weren't expecting you." "I should have called. I know. I brought Errol his father's music. I thought." She held it out, the worn pages, Toby's pencil. "I thought he'd want it." Vesper took it. She took it the way you take a flyer from someone on a corner. Already, in the taking, deciding where the nearest trash can was. "That's so thoughtful. He's actually in a meeting right now, a work call. I shouldn't interrupt. But I'll make sure he gets it." She was already, gently, closing the door. "Drive safe, Marlowe. It's such a long way." The door shut. Marlowe stood on the gray step with her hands empty, and the green identical lawns running away on either side, and she did not cry this time. The clarity from the dark roadside was still in her. Cold and steady. She drove home. And that night, for the first time in 2 years, she went to the closet, and she knelt down, her knees protesting, and she lifted the loudsboard, and she took out the box. The box was a gray steel thing the size of a bread loaf, heavier than it looked, and Marlowe carried it to the bed with both hands, the way she'd once carried Errol as a sleeping child. She sat on the edge of the quilt and turned the little key that lived on the same ring as the Boatyard fob, and lifted the lid. On top was their life in documents. The marriage license, the paper gone soft as cloth at the folds. Errol's birth certificate. Toby's death certificate, which she moved quickly past, the way you step over a place on the floor that always creaks. The house deed. And beneath all of it, in a long manila envelope she had not opened in 2 years, the Boatyard. She drew it out. The deed first. Ashby Boatworks. The metes and bounds, the legal language, describing in surveyor's poetry the run of the shoreline she could have walked in her sleep, thence northerly along the mean high water mark. 41 acres, the paper said. Not 40, 41. Toby had always shorted it by an acre when he talked, out of some old fisherman's superstition about never counting your full haul out loud, and clipped behind the deed, the appraisal. She had known the number was large. She had let herself not look at it. Now she looked. The Boatyard building and the 41 acres of deep water frontage with the meadow and the road access and the protected cove that a developer's eye would price above rubies. $4,200,000, the appraiser had written, 18 months before Toby died, in a tone of professional astonishment, with 3 pages of comparable sales appended, none of which came close, because there was nothing else like it left on that stretch of coast. It was, the appraiser noted, very possibly the last unsubdivided deep-water parcel of its size, between 2 named points Marlowe knew as the mouth of the river and the lighthouse. $4,200,000. She sat with the number a long time. It did not feel like joy or relief or even surprise, exactly. It felt like vertigo. The sensation of having lived for 2 years on a floor she'd thought was solid ground and learning it was a high ledge. Down the slope in the dark, the building she swept once a week and oiled the doors of for no reason she could name was worth more than every house in Renport put together. And she had been letting a girl in a silk robe make her feel that her sound roof was a burden. There was one more thing in the envelope, a letter in Toby's hand, sealed, with Marlowe written on the front. She had read it once, the week after the funeral, and had not been able to read it again, and she did not open it now either. But she held it, and she remembered the part she'd never been able to forget, the part he'd written near the end, when the doctors had stopped pretending. "You have more than you think, Mar, and you are stronger than you believe. Don't let anyone make you small over it. The yard is yours. Do with it whatever keeps you living. Just don't let the wolves talk you out of it while you're grieving. They'll come when they smell that you're alone. Don't sign your life to anyone." She had read that 2 years ago as a grieving man's worry, the kind of thing dying husbands say. The wolves, she'd thought. Poor Toby, frightening himself. She had not understood it as a prophecy. She understood it now. Marlowe put everything back in the box, except the appraisal, which she read once more, and the letter, which she held against her chest for a moment like a warm stone. Then she made a decision, sitting there on the edge of the bed in the lamplight, and the decision was as cold and clear as the thing that had settled in her on the dark roadside. She would tell no one, not Errol. Above all, not Vesper. Whatever the Boatyard was, $4 million, or the smell of cedar, or the last conversation she had left with her husband, it was hers, and she would not lay it on the table for anyone to price. Toby had hidden it in a box under a board for 2 years past his own death. The least she could do was keep it hidden a while longer, until she understood what she was holding and who, exactly, was coming for it. She did not have long to wait. The campaign began, as Della had warned it would, with concern. It started 10 days later, with a call from Vesper that had the old shape. Soft open, sharp middle, sweet close, but a new subject. The roof was retired. The new theme was Marlowe's future. "We've just been so worried about you, out there alone," Vesper said. "Errol especially. He doesn't sleep. He keeps saying, 'What if she falls? What if something happens and we don't know for days?' It's so isolated up there, Marlowe. An hour from anyone. An hour from you," Marlowe thought. "You used to be glad of the hour." "I'm fine, dear," she said. "I've lived here 40 years. That's just it, though. You have. It's been so much. The house, the taxes, that whole boatyard just sitting there needing upkeep. We've actually been talking, Errol and I, about whether it might be time to simplify, make things easier for you. You've earned easier, Marlowe." There it was, simplify. Della had used that very word, on the phone, in the winter. "They'll start measuring your burdens, out loud, right before they ask you to sign something." "Simplify how?" Marlowe asked. And she kept her voice exactly the voice they wanted to hear from her. A little vague, a little tired, a little grateful for the attention. She had begun without quite planning to act. The part came to her easily. She had taught children for 40 years. She knew how to be underestimated. Well, and this is just an idea. Throw it out if you hate it. But if you sold the house and the yard, you could be done with all the worry. We'd help you, of course, every step. There's an amazing community down near us. Independent living, gorgeous, like a resort really. Gardens and a pool, and people your own age. And you'd be 20 minutes from us instead of an hour. We could see you all the time." A breath. The sweet close. Wouldn't that be wonderful, to not have to worry about a single thing ever again? "It's a lot to think about, Aunt," Marlowe said. "Don't think too hard," Vesper said, laughing. "Thinking too hard is how people miss good things." 2 days after that, Errol came north. Alone, which Marlowe noted, because Vesper sending him alone meant Vesper had decided this part went better mother to son. He sat on the couch where she'd held him through childhood fevers, and he could not look at her, and he turned his car keys over and over in his hand, the way he had turned things over as a boy when he'd broken something and was working up to confessing it. "Mom, Vesper and I have been talking about your future." So she said, I think, the house is too much for you now. The yard. All of it. You seem tired, Mom. You seem, I don't know, down. Since Dad." He swallowed. "We just want you somewhere safe, where you're taken care of. Vesper knows the market cold. She could get top dollar for the property, and then you'd be set up. No worries, close to us." And here was the thing that nearly broke Marlowe's resolve, the thing that made her want to drop the act and gather him up. She could see, under the script, that some part of him believed it. He had told himself a story in which selling his mother's home and his father's boatyard out from under was an act of love, because the alternative, that he was a drowning man reaching for the only thing left that would float, and that his wife was holding his head under and pointing, was a thing he could not bear to look at directly. So he had wrapped it in safe and taken care of and close to us, and he half believed it. And that was worse than if he'd been a simple liar. "Errol," she said gently, "is the dealership all right?" His head came up. For just a second, the boy looked out of the man's face. The storm-coming look, the dropping pressure he had no word for. "It's fine," he said too fast. "Why would you ask that?" "No reason," a mother asks. She let it go. But she had her answer, and the answer was the whole key to everything. And she filed it with the look in the boatyard, and not a museum, and such a long way. The file was getting thick now. "Just promise you'll think about it," he said, standing, jingling the keys. "Vesper's going to set up a time. She wants to bring someone, a guy who can walk us through the paperwork, the property side, make it all easy. Just to talk. No pressure." No pressure, Marlowe thought, and a guy with paperwork. "I'll think about it," she said, and walked her son to the door, and he hugged her. Longer this time, and she felt in it something that might have been the real boy fighting the script, a flicker. And then he got in his 2 new car and drove back south to whatever was waiting for him there. And Marlowe stood in the doorway and watched him go, the way she'd watched him go since the wedding, lifting her hand, the hand he no longer turned to see. The minute his car was out of sight, she went inside, and she did not sit down in the dark and grieve. She picked up the phone and she called Della Renwick. "Della," she said, "you were right. About the sound they make. They're making it." She drew a breath. "And there's something I never told you. Something Toby left me. I think I need you to come over. And I think we're going to need a lawyer, a good one. The kind who knows about this, about families and old women and people with paperwork. Do you know one?" There was a silence on Della's end, but a different silence than the winter one. This one had a smile in it, and something harder under the smile, the 30 years of probate counter under it. "Marlowe Ashby," Della said. "I know exactly the one. And, honey, whatever it is Toby left you, don't you say one more word about it on this phone, or to that boy, or to anyone, until we're sitting across a desk from Coralie Whitfield. You hear me?" "I hear you," Marlowe said. And down the slope, in the long June dusk, the boatyard stood with its doors oiled clean and its bell unrung. $4,200,000 of cedar-smelling silence. And for the first time it did not feel to Marlowe like a thing she was keeping. It felt like a thing that was about to keep her. Coralie Whitfield kept her office above a chandlery in the old part of the harbor town, up a flight of stairs that smelled of rope and tar. And Marlowe liked her before she'd said a word, liked the worn leather chairs, the window full of masts, the fact that the woman had chosen to work over a shop that sold cleats and marine varnish instead of in some glass tower. Coralie was perhaps 55, gray coming in at the temples, with the unhurried watchfulness of someone who had heard every kind of story, and was no longer surprised by any of them, only sometimes saddened. Della came too, and sat in the second chair like a bailiff, arms folded, 30 years of probate counter in her spine. "Tell me from the beginning," Coralie said. "Don't decide what matters. Let me decide what matters." So Marlowe told it, the first meeting and the pricing look, the boatyard walk and how much land comes with it, the candle that smelled of an ocean she lived side, the wedding, row 4, table 11, the quartet that played over her voice, the silence after, the robe at 2 in the afternoon, and Toby's music taken like a flyer. And then the box under the board, and the number on the appraisal, and the letter she couldn't read twice, and the calls about her future, and her son turning his keys over on the couch, and the man with paperwork that Vesper wanted to bring. When she finished, Coralie was quiet for a moment, making a final note. Then she set down her pen. "Mrs. Ashby, I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it plainly, because people in your situation often spend a great deal of energy wondering if they're imagining things. You are not imagining anything. What you've described is a pattern. I see it 10 times a year. It has a shape, and your family is following the shape exactly." "What shape?" Marlowe asked. "Isolation first, make the person feel alone and far away and a burden. Then erosion, make them doubt their own competence. You seem tired, you seem down, it's so much for you. Then the rescue. Present the very thing that strips them as a kindness. We just want you safe. And then, at the end, the paperwork, brought by a friendly third party so it feels official and gentle instead of what it is. Coralie folded her hands. The man Vesper wants to bring. Did Errol say what he is? Just a guy who can walk us through the property side. Make it easy. Coralie and Della exchanged a look. Probably a notary, Coralie said. They like to bring a notary. It puts a seal on things, makes a frightened person feel they're in the presence of the law. But I'll tell you what a notary actually is, Mrs. Ashby, because it matters. A notary verifies that you are who you say you are, and that you signed of your own free will. That is all a notary does. A notary cannot draft a sale, cannot give you financial advice, cannot tell you a deal is good for you. If a notary does any of that, he is committing the unauthorized practice of law. And depending on what's in the documents, he may be part of something a good deal worse. So we are going to want to know exactly who this man is and exactly what he hands you. Marlowe felt the vertigo of the bedroom again, but steadier now, because there was someone in the room who knew the shape of the ledge. So what do I do? She asked. Do I just refuse to see them? No. Coralie almost smiled. No, that's the last thing we do. If you refuse, they regroup. And they come back smarter. And next time, maybe you're more tired or more frightened, or they've found a doctor somewhere willing to say you're confused. No, we don't run from it. We get ready for it. We build armor, and then we let them walk right up to it. She drew a clean legal pad toward her. Here's what we're going to do. And I want your blessing on each piece before I draft a thing. Because this is your life and your husband's yard, not mine. What Coralie laid out over the next hour, Marlowe would later think of as the day her grief turned into something with hands. First, the property. We're going to put the boatyard and the 41 acres into an irrevocable trust, Coralie said. Irrevocable is the word that matters. Once it's in, you can't be talked out of it, charmed out of it, or pressured out of it. And crucially, neither can anyone acting on your behalf. We'll name a neutral professional trustee, not family, so there's no one for Vesper to lean on. You'll still have the use of it, the income, the right to live with it as you please for the rest of your life. But the ownership moves somewhere. No one can reach it across your kitchen table with a gold pen. After that, Mrs. Ashby, there is physically nothing for them to make you sign. The thing they want will already be gone where they can't follow. Marlowe thought of Toby's letter. Don't sign your life to anyone. Yes, she said. Do that. Second, your competence. The whole back half of their plan. And I'd bet the deed on this depends on being able to suggest, if you resist, that you're not capable of deciding for yourself. So we take that weapon away before they pick it up. I'd like you to see a physician, not your family doctor, someone independent, for a full cognitive evaluation. We get a signed letter, dated, stating that you are of completely sound mind and capable of managing your own affairs. Then, if anyone ever whispers the word incompetent, we hand them a doctor's letter and the whisper dies. Imogen Vance, Della said immediately. Geriatrician, 2 towns over. Sharp as a tack and won't be charmed. Perfect. Coralie wrote it down. Third, and this one's about evidence, because if they're running a real scheme, we may need to prove it. Maine is a one-party consent state. That means you, as a party to a conversation, may record it without telling the other people. It's legal here. She looked at Marlowe over her glasses. I'm not telling you to spy on your son. I'm telling you that if these people sit at your table and lay out a plan to strip you, you are within your rights to have a record of them doing it for your protection and for the protection of whoever they do this to next. Because people like the man with the paperwork, Mrs. Ashby, they are rarely doing it to just one family. Marlowe sat very still. How would I? A recorder in the room, running. Della's grandson can set you up something simple. Coralie's voice gentled. You don't have to decide that piece today, but I'd carry it. And fourth, here Coralie set her pen down entirely. When the day comes, when they bring the paperwork, you are not going to be alone in that room with them. I'll be there. I'll come as your attorney, and I'll come quietly in the next room if you like, until you call. But I also want 2 other people present, and I want them present for a reason. I want a witness from Adult Protective Services, and I want someone with standing in this community whose presence makes it clear this is not a private family squabble, but a documented matter. Della, Cormac Teague still around? Cormac? Della snorted. Retired police chief, hasn't missed a town meeting in 40 years. Known Marlowe since the Ford administration. He'll come. He'll love to come. Then we have our armor. Coralie sat back. Irrevocable trust, so there's nothing to sign over. A capacity letter, so there's no calling you confused. A lawful recording, so there's a record. And the right people in the room, so it can never be made small or private or deniable. Mrs. Ashby, by the time those documents come across your table, the table will be a trap, and they will be the ones standing in it. Marlowe looked out the window at the masts moving against the gray sky. She thought of the brass bell down in the cedar dark, the one Toby rang at the end of a good day. One clear note, and the work is done and done right. Do all of it, she said. The next 2 weeks were the busiest of Marlowe's widowhood, and the strangest, because she did all of it in secret while performing, on the phone, the part of a tired old woman slowly being talked into giving up. Dr. Imogen Vance was indeed Sharp's attack, and could not be charmed. She walked Marlowe through an hour of testing. Memory, reasoning, the drawing of clocks, the recalling of words, and at the end she took off her glasses and said, Mrs. Ashby, I'm going to write a letter saying you have the cognition of a woman 20 years younger, and the judgment of a Supreme Court justice. May I ask what brought you in? And when Marlowe told her, Dr. Vance's pleasant face went briefly to flint, and she said, I'll date it for today, and I'll make it ironclad. I've testified in these. You come back to me the moment anyone says the word capacity, do you hear? Della's grandson, a polite boy of 19 who asked no questions, showed Marlowe a small recorder no larger than a key fob. You just press here, Mrs. Ashby. It goes for 8 hours. Put it in your sweater pocket and forget it's there. Coralie drafted the trust. The neutral trustee was a trust company in Portland, with a name as gray as a granite ledge. Marlowe sat in the office over the chandlery and signed her husband's Boatyard into a structure that no charm and ever pry loose, and when she set the pen down, she felt, could not lost but the opposite. She felt Toby's hand on her shoulder, and she heard, somewhere far back in her clip of the bell, the single clear note of the bell, and all the while, on the phone, she let Vesper believe it was working. I have been thinking about what you said, she told her, in the small, vague voice. About simplifying. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's too much for me now. She could practically hear Vesper's smile come down the line like sun through a window. Oh, Marlowe, I'm so glad. We just want what's best for you. Let's set a time. Let's have Errol there. And I'll bring Linus. He's wonderful. He'll make it all so simple. Linus. Now the man had a name. That sounds lovely, dear, Marlowe said. Come Saturday. I'll make coffee. She hung up and sat in the window seat in the late light, the recorder already charging on the sill beside a candle she had finally thrown away, and she looked down the brown-green slope to the boatyard, hers and not hers now, safe in a granite gray structure 90 miles south, the doors oiled clean, the bell waiting. Saturday, Toby, she said to the room. The room didn't answer, but she could have sworn the bell did. Saturday came gray and still, the bay flat as poured pewter. Marlowe was up before light. She did not bake, and she did not fuss. She made a pot of coffee, set out 4 cups. She knew there would be 4, and pressed the small recorder on at 9:30, slid it into the pocket of her cardigan, and forgot it was there, the way the boy had said she would. Coralie had come the night before, and slept in the spare room. By 9:30, she was settled in the back kitchen, with the door ajar, a thermos, and a folder of her own, near enough to hear, out of sight until called. Cormac Teague, 81, straight-backed, wearing the same gray suit he'd worn to town meetings for 40 years, sat in Toby's reading chair by the window with the patience of a man who had spent a career waiting for people to make their move. And Bess Holloway, the caseworker from Adult Protective Services, sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and the calm, unreadable courtesy of someone whose whole job was to watch how families treated their old. Remember, Coralie had said, you let them run it all the way. You don't tip your hand until the pen is in your fingers. We need the whole shape of it on that recorder. Not a hint, the whole thing. Can you do that? I taught 9-year-olds the cello for 40 years, Marlo had said. I can wait through anything. At 10, exactly, the low new car came down the dirt drive, and behind it a sedan, and out of the sedan stepped a thin man in a brown suit carrying a leather case. Linus Crabbe had a sparse mustache and eyes that moved around the front of the house the way Vespers had, pricing the shingles, except his arithmetic was cruder. He was simply counting what the day would be worth to him. Marlo opened the door before they knocked, with her smallest, vaguest, most tired smile. Come in, come in. Coffee's hot. They came in. Errol would not meet her eye. He had the storm-coming look, so deep in his face now that she ached at the sight of him, this drowning man in a good shirt. Vesper was radiant, in command, a folder thick as a hymnal under her arm. Linus set his case on the table and opened it with a little ceremony, laying out a seal, a pad of blue ink, a sheaf of letterhead forms, and a gold pen, which he placed at the head of the stack like a place setting. Mrs. Ashby. His voice was warm and false. Such a pleasure. I'm here to make this whole thing painless. We'll have you all squared away in no time. They sat. Vesper opened the hymnal folder and began, and Marlo let her run. It ran for 40 minutes, and Marlo sat through every minute of it, nodding, vague, occasionally pressing 2 fingers to her temple, as if the words were almost too many. And the whole shape came out, just as Coralie had wanted, clean onto the recorder in her pocket. The house. Sold. Vesper had a buyer ready. The boatyard and the land, signed into a family management LLC, for Marlo's protection, so the burden of it would be lifted from her shoulders. The proceeds, into a joint account so that Errol and Vesper could handle the financial side and keep her safe from scams. A financial power of attorney, naming Vesper, just in case your health ever made decisions hard. And the resort-like place down south, the independent living, the gardens, and the pool. The brochure slid across the table, glossy, a building that looked like a hospital, pretending not to be. And what if? Marlo asked, in the small voice, fingering the brochure. What if later I changed my mind, about the land? Here Vesper and Linus exchanged the look, the one the recorder couldn't catch but Marlo etched into memory, and Linus said, smoothly, well, ma'am, these are designed to be final, you see, for your own protection. If a person your age could undo these things on a whim, why, anyone could come along and take advantage of you. And Vesper, leaning in close, the hard sell proximity, added gently, and of course, Marlo, if there were ever any question about your judgment down the road, and I'm not saying there would be, having Errol and me on the account just protects you, from yourself, even. She smiled. That's all this is. Love. There it was. The whole shape. The land into an entity they controlled. The money into their hands. The power of attorney to take her voice. And, at the end, sweetly, the threat dressed as love. The readiness to call her incompetent if she ever resisted. 40 minutes, every word recorded in her own kitchen. Beside the piano, Toby's son had learned to walk past. Linus uncapped the gold pen and set it in her fingers. Right here, ma'am. And here. And here. His finger tapped the dotted lines like crosses on a hill. Marlo held the pen. The room held its breath. Vesper leaned in. Errol stared at the table, and Marlo set the pen down. Before I sign anything, she said, and her voice was no longer small, no longer vague. It came out level and clear, the voice that had carried across 40 years of recital halls. I'd like the rest of us to come in. Coralie? The kitchen door opened. Coralie Whitfield walked in with her folder. Cormac Teague rose from Toby's chair, straightening to his full gray-suited height. Bess Holloway lifted her pen from the legal pad. The color left Vesper's face the way water leaves sand. Marlo, she started, who are these? This is Coralie Whitfield, my attorney. This is Bess Holloway from Adult Protective Services. She's been taking notes. And this is Cormac Teague, who was chief of police in this town for 26 years and who held me at my husband's funeral. Marlo folded her hands on the table. I asked them here because I had a feeling about today, and it seems my feeling was right. Linus was already closing his case. I'm only here to provide notary services. Sit down, Mr. Crabbe, Coralie said, and there was iron in it. She set her folder on the table and opened it. Let's start with what you've been doing this past 40 minutes, because I heard most of it through that door. Advising on the sale. Recommending a financial structure. Explaining to this woman why the document should be irreversible. Mr. Crabbe, a notary commission permits you to verify a signature. It does not permit you to draft instruments or counsel a client on her affairs. What I just heard is the unauthorized practice of law, at minimum. She let that land, but I don't think it's only that. I think if Miss Holloway and I pull the thread on you, Mr. Crabbe, we're going to find you've sat at other kitchen tables, in front of other tired widows with that same gold pen. Aren't we? Linus said nothing. His mustache had gone gray as the bay. As for the documents themselves, Coralie said, turning to Vesper, almost pleasantly, they have a problem, a rather large one. She drew a single page from her folder and laid it in the center of the table, facing the younger woman. The Boatyard and the 41 acres aren't Mrs. Ashby's to sell, or to sign into anyone's LLC. They were placed into an irrevocable trust 2 weeks ago, with a neutral professional trustee. There is no document on this table. There is no document in existence that can move that property to either of you. It is gone where you cannot reach it. So everything you've spent 40 minutes building, I'm afraid, was built on sand. The silence was total. And then Marlo did the thing she'd waited the whole long winter and spring to do. She rose and she went to the closet, and she came back with one more paper, and she laid it beside Coralie's, and her hand was perfectly steady. And here's the part you might find interesting, she said. Since you were both so worried about a poor, confused widow with a burdensome old boatyard, that land Vesper kept calling a burden, the last waterfront parcel of its kind on this coast. She let her finger rest on the figure, $4,200,000. Coralie tells me a developer's been circling it for a year. She looked at Vesper, and for the first time she let the younger woman see that she had always known. But then, you knew that, didn't you, dear? You knew exactly what it was worth the first time you walked into that boatyard and asked me how many acres. You weren't worried about my burden. You'd already found your buyer. Vesper's mouth opened and closed. Coralie said mildly, into the gap. We'll be looking at that, too, whether there was a developer arrangement in place before today. It does change the complexion of things, legally, when the concern has a commission attached. It was Errol who broke. He had not said a word the whole time. Now he put his face in his hands and his shoulders went. And out of the man came a sound Marlo had not heard since he was small and had broken something he loved. Mom, he said into his hands. Mom, the dealership's gone. It's gone. I'm 300,000 under. And she said, your place would. She said it was the only, he couldn't finish. And there it was, the whole sad truth of it, the drowning man and the hands on his head. Marlo came around the table. She did not gather him up. She had learned that much. But she put her hand on his bent neck, the way she had 1,000 times over 1,000 fevers, and she said, quietly, so only he could hear it, Oh, my boy, you should have just told me you were drowning. I'd have thrown you a rope. You didn't have to help her sell the boat out from under us. The afternoon ended the way these things end, not with handcuffs and sirens, but with people gathering their coats and going. Linus Crabbe left first, fast, leaving the gold pen behind on the table. No one touched it. Bess Holloway stayed an hour writing, and told Marlo, at the door, that she was glad, truly glad, and that not every house she walked into ended like this one, and Marlo understood that she meant the other houses, The ones with no Della, no Coralie, no box under a board. The slower reckonings came over the months that followed, and they came as Coralie had promised, quietly and lawfully. Linus Crabbe surrendered his notary commission rather than face the complaint. The thread, once pulled, ran to 3 other widows in 2 counties, and Bess Holloway's file became somebody else's whole career. Vesper. Finding there was nothing left to pry loose and no charmed widow to pry it from, was gone within the season, back to the brokerage, to the catalog finished life, to whatever next listing she could price. The marriage did not survive the discovery that there had been nothing in it to inherit. Coralie had seen to it that Errol's debts and his mother's trust never touched, so Faust, when Vesper left, she left empty-handed, which was, Marlowe reflected, the only language the woman had ever really spoken. And Errol was harder and slower and real. He lost the dealership. It had been lost before Saturday, truly, just not yet admitted. He came north on Sundays, alone, and at first the visits were all silence and rehearsed apology, and Marlowe let them be, because she had told him the truest thing she knew, that forgiveness wasn't asked for, it was earned, and earned with actions over a long time, not words over a short one. But slowly the rehearsed boy gave way to the real one. He started fixing the things around the place he'd let her mention were broken. He sanded the Boatyard's big door one Sunday without being asked, on cop. And one cold afternoon in the fall she came down to the yard and found him standing in front of the brass bell, just looking at it, the way you look at a thing from your childhood. And she stood beside him, and neither of them said anything. And that was the most they'd healed yet. And it was enough for that day. She did not sell the Boatyard. She did the other thing Toby's letter had told her to do. Do with it whatever keeps you living. With Coralie's help, she turned it into something the town had never had. A free summer program where the children of Wrenport learned to build a small boat and sail it, and learned, in the off hours, whatever instrument Marlowe could teach them in the cedar-smelling shop, with the piano she'd had hauled down and set up by the wide windows over the water. Della moved into the loft above the workshop. Not as help, she was very clear, but as the sister I picked. Corm MacTeague came by to growl at the children and was secretly their favorite. And once a season, Coralie Whitfield drove up the coast and held a free afternoon clinic for the town's old people on how to keep what was theirs. On the first good day of every program, when a child finished a hull and it floated true, Marlowe let them ring the bell. One clear note, out over the water, the way Toby had rung it at the end of a good day. The work is done and done right. She wrote her letter the following winter, in the window seat, by the light of a string of small bulbs and a single candle on the sill. A real one now, not the catalog kind. She wrote it in her careful slanting hand, and she signed it only Marlowe, and she ended it with the line she'd come to understand was the truest thing her husband ever told her, the thing it had taken her 67 years and one terrible Saturday to believe. I had more than I thought, and I was stronger than I knew. I only had to remember who I was.
I've read that letter more times than I'll admit. And the part that stays with me isn't the Boatyard or the $4 million, or even the moment she set the pen down, though, Lord, what a moment. It's the line about remembering who she was. Because so many of us, when the people we love start making us feel small, we believe them. We start to think maybe the burden is us. She didn't, in the end. She remembered. So if you're sitting somewhere tonight being slowly talked out of your own life by someone who says it's for your own good, I hope her story finds the part of you that still remembers who you are. Forgiveness can open a door, but trust only walks back through it on its own 2 feet, over a long, long time. Good night.